have the
Yeah, thank you very much. Oops, it's not showing. Oops. Okay, it's now I move. Ah. Yeah, I'll just quickly go through the last lessons just to get an idea. And the first element was, of course, about money and about providing the adequate resource and staff for duration, because that's often a question. That there are many concerns about what is needed in terms of budget and human resources for evaluation, and that's the question in many providers of aid. And the budgets are currently varying a lot between donors. Some spending 0.006% of their ODA managed in evaluation, and some spending as much as 0.9%. But it's still relatively small part of the aid programs. That I've read somewhere that not wanting an evaluation system is like wanting to build a house, but only want to buy the bricks and the mortar, not wanting to go for the inspection of the soil, the construction permit, and all the thing that goes around. So it's quite an important aspect, and evaluation should not be seen, I think that's a key message here, as an expense. It should also be seen as adding value to improving the effectiveness. So there is value for money in evaluation, clearly. So that's important. Another lesson that was ask question that matters. So again, not look at just the aid results, but also the development results that the intervention and the development cooperation has had, and increase the focus on impact. And we're going to talk about that in the results-based management. Also ask bigger questions like job creation, growth, gender equality. And that refers back to one of the main trends, to not only look at the intervention itself, but also at different themes and different sectors, and do a sectoral evaluation. That's kind of important. And that comes back also to the question on how to do it. And again, there is no gold standard on evaluation, and the method that should be used should take in consideration what is the purpose and what is the intended use. And the evaluation guidance at the strategic level should provide some guidance and some quality check, but it should also allow for a variety of evaluation mechanisms. So that's quite, and also it allow the evaluation mechanisms to evolve, because the way development cooperation is done today is not the same as going to be tomorrow. So if it evolves, development cooperation evolves, so has the evaluation of development cooperation. Strengthening the learning culture, and that's something that we've already touched upon. Well, it has to be throughout the organization that there is a result focused, and that a learning culture on evaluation is not only for the evaluation unit. That should not be isolated to the evaluation unit. Another lesson is communicate. We come back to that, and plan your intervention in terms also on how you're going to use the results, and how you're going to use the evaluation to communicate and tailor products to different audiences. Improve the language also improve the language of your evaluation documents, so that it's clear. It's not jargoning in a way. And you can also diversify formats. Have public events, filmed evaluation, a workshop with stakeholders to show what was the result and what was the evaluation of the interventions and the themes or the sectors. I won't go into that. The act on evaluation finding, I think we've already touched many things. Have a formal system for management response. And that's an issue that's across many providers, is that, yeah, they have evaluation systems, but they're not really a clear mechanism on, how do I take this evaluation into consideration? What is the management response to that? Work together, again, the collaboration and the involvement of the partners. There is often lack of involvement of partners and on different stakeholders in the evaluation process from the beginning. And finally, use the evaluation as a way to support in the use of country capacities. I'll talk about this afternoon about an example of donor that one of its, 10 of its indicators at country level are based on the country system itself. So it has its indicators in terms of intervention, but it has also indicators that are mirrored on the country capacities. So that's some of the lessons, and I'm just going to briefly present you what are the DAC evaluation criteria, because I think that's quite important. They have been there since 1991, but actually now there were 5. So I'll, what was the? There were 5 initially from 1991. So it's relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. I'll present them briefly. But since 2018, there have been some global consultation on adaptation of these criteria. And there's been, the consultation, and now they're considering adding coherence as a 6th criteria. So the whole process is almost over, but it's going to be adopted by the DAC hopefully in the December meeting. So it's quite an evolution in terms of process. And why these evaluation criteria are important? Not only for evaluation, but also because they have a normative role. What do I mean by that? Is that, well, by the criteria that we use to evaluate, we also determine what are good interventions. You know, that all interventions should be relevant to the context, should be coherent with other interventions, should achieve their objectives, should deliver results in an efficient way, and have positive impacts at last. So it's not about evaluation also, it's not only about evaluation, it's about also what are the objectives that we're trying to achieve. So relevance basically is how much does the intervention objectives and design respond to the beneficiaries' global, country, and partner needs, their policies and their priorities. And how much does it continue to do so when the context changes? We're just talking about there's a change in context in terms of a brochure or a video format. You know that the context might change in terms of needs. Well, how do we adapt to that? And does the system allow for that to happen when circumstances change? And it can be, of course, a much more difficult situation when you have a country that falls into conflict or falls into a political crisis. How do you react? How do you adapt? Second, well, effectiveness. How much does the intervention achieve its immediate objectives and direct results? And also how much it has done so across different groups. It can be in terms of gender, it can be of regional aspects, it can be across different lines. Efficiency, well, have we used the resources right? So how much does the intervention delivers in terms of economic and timely way? So we define economic as the conversion of inputs into outputs, and timely is either the intended time frame, so have we done the intervention as we planned, or if not, what were the, how reasonable was it of a delay because of the changing circumstances? Impact, well, have we made a difference? How much is the intervention generating significant positive or negative impact, intended or intended higher level effects? So that's, the focus here is more on the transformative social, economic, environmental effects of the intervention. So it's really more about examining more the holistic and enduring changes in terms of difference. Sustainability, how much the net benefits of the intervention continues or are likely to continue over time. So that's basically taking in consideration the capacities of the system, just not just have a one shot, but make sure that what you've done is going to be sustainable and have an impact over time. So that requires kind of different analysis in terms of resilience, risks, potential trade-off when you do the intervention. And finally, so that's not a criterion yet, coherence. And that's increasingly an important aspect in the strategies, and that's why it's being translated in terms of evaluation criteria. It's, well, basically how compatible is the intervention with other interventions in a country, in a sector, or an institution. So that's internal coherence, so the kind of synergies and interlinkages with other interventions, but also external coherence, you know, how is your intervention fitting into the broader pattern of other donors in the same context, in terms of complementarity, harmonization, coordination, added value, etc. Yes.
Well,
yes.
Thank you, Cindy, for this wonderful presentation of that evaluation criteria. At what level are they applied? Can we apply these criteria, especially the last one, the 6, 5+1, to a particular project, what the other actors are doing? For example, Serbia happily created a new Ministry for European Affairs, European Integration Affairs, and Bulgaria, we received some signals and we are financing a project successfully. Also, maybe other democratic institutions in Serbia, like the Ombudsman. Mm-hmm. So, is this the last one, criterion? Mm-hmm. Would it be applicable just for the evaluating this project, particular, for example, in support of the Ministry for European Integration of Serbia, or for the of the Ombudsman? Or are these criteria applicable only at a higher level, programming level or strategic framework level? Thank you.
Well, the criteria are relevant at all levels, from project level, country level, or strategic level. And I think that's quite important, because when you look at your results framework and indicators, and we're going to talk about that, you have to ask these 5 or 6 questions now on all of them to make sure and that they have an importance in isolation from one another, each criteria, but they also have an importance as an overall system. And so I think the best is always to, well, build your result framework and then, you know, stress test it in a way on all these criteria. You know, look at your result framework and say, well, how is this result framework? Will it allow me to have this coherence? Will it allow me to have this effectiveness and to measure it? So I think it's and they are relevant at all levels of interventions, sectors, themes. That's why they remain quite broad, but they remain relevant. Yep.
So I move on now. I think what is important is that if we are a manager of a project or a program, we look to these criteria, and before we start drafting the proposal of the project and the program, we start having, we start thinking about how much this matches with what I'm planning, and what are the answers that I can give if I'm asked about this. And then if you do it as an ex-ante exercise before you start, then you're also much more coherent in terms of what are the indicators you want to put there, and you have a thinking around the implementation process that allows you then to be in line with all these criteria when you are going to evaluate them. So the learning process is then much more simpler, less bureaucratic. You don't duplicate and you don't come at the last minute. As like, oh, I forgot this indicator. Because you had the time to plan. So what we always say is that take your time to start in the best way you can start. Because starting well then will help you getting where you want to go. So sometimes we rush a lot because at the last minute we need to put something together and we don't think through these comprehensive framework, and then we have problems because we were not thinking about them before or preventing them. The other thing that this allows you is that also to have risk management strategies in place, because you can say, okay, so in case there is a coup d'etat, in case there is a change of government, in case that there is a humanitarian crisis, what should I do? And if you already start planning this scenario approach based on this coherence, on this, efficiency and so on and so forth, when and if they happen, you already know what you should be doing next. You don't lose time again in the process. And time is also money. So the more bureaucracy we have around implementation, the more money we spend. Because sometimes we don't count the number of hours that public servants are working, for this, and what are they producing in terms of productivity. But if we spend more time on the bureaucracy than on the implementation itself, then of course that's not value for money in terms of your mission, which is development cooperation and implementation on the ground, supporting that. So this is also linking to improving the efficiency of the system somehow and reducing transaction costs, that we need to go again to the situation and then you spend 2 months finding a solution for a situation that you could have already thought about it before. And so we are just going to go now on the Slovakia concrete example, just to give a concrete example about these indicators that they are using. So they are using indicators, and indicators can be used at different levels. They can be used at strategic implementation level, they can be used in terms of projects, and they can be used also to monitor all of government approaches. What do I mean by this? So indicators are, as I told in the beginning, are not only quantitative indicators related with the project itself. We can use it to map all the system in terms of implementation. So, for instance, if you see here what Slovakia, I hope this is, yes. If you see what Slovakia is doing, they are doing something that relates with their SDG strategy already. And they are mapping not only indicators of projects, but already indicators of the implementation of their strategy. So that's the macro level, if you want. For instance, implementation of strategic approach to humanitarian aid. That's the objective. What is the outcome? The strategy itself. Was it done? Was it wishful thinking? Did we manage to do it? It's there, it's not there. That's already something that we should measure, because it's also about getting the planning and the programming at the macro level, followed, monitored. And then one is the term for that. And then what are the ministries responsible? So here, as you can see, the success is also engaging with other parts of the government. It's not only the responsibility of one ministry. And then what is the indicator that they put there? The approval of this. That's an indicator that they start the cycle, they finish the cycle. Okay? What is the factors of success to this? It's not only relying in one, it's relying on political will and the capacity to negotiate. Okay? If we go then to the other level, sorry, which one is it? Yeah, this one. Okay. Which is the project level. If you see it there, you have targets, you have the SDG that is relevant, and then what are the 2030 agenda indicators that we are going to use. So yesterday we talked a lot about reinventing the wheel. Sometimes we spend a lot of time thinking about indicators. If we align them with the SDG implementation, the indicators are there for most of the areas. So why not using already what was agreed internationally? And then when you report back to the UN, you already have your report done. So again, the value for money of trying to align things in the way that you don't spend so much time and you still think about your own projects related with the international dimension of what you are doing. So then you could say to the world, Bulgaria is contributing to these SDGs, both at home and internationally. And we have indicators, they show what we are doing. So this is an example, of course, and you can go through different examples, but I just wanted to flag this because we had the colleague from Slovakia yesterday here. And I think it might be a good and a simple example of what things that can be done to align the cycle of the project with this international agenda already. Sorry, if we go, thanks, Sydney. If we go to the results-based measurement process, so what is different from the evaluation? You might say, oh, this is too much jargon coming from the OECD. It is jargon. But behind the jargon, there is a mentality, approach to these things. What do we want to do with the results-based management approach? We want to think not only about evaluating the projects and what we do, we want to think about what are the results that we are achieving, what is the impact that we are achieving on the ground beyond what the educators tell us. So it's not only related with what we do, it's related with what are contributing to achieve. For instance, if a target in Serbia will be to get 3,000 more young kids in the universities, imagine. We are contributing to that aim of Serbia if we are having a project in education sector that will support that. Will the result of that depend only on us? No, it will depend also on the government of Serbia to put in place certain mechanisms. We can then discuss if the government of Serbia has all the means they need, or if Bulgaria or other donors should join and support the government of Serbia in delivering this. But we are not alone. So the framework of results is saying, how am I contributing to the broader aim or the broader development objective of that partner country? And what do I bring to contribute to that? So is the result going to be immediately delivered by me? No, but I'm contributing to that. And that's what I want to manage and measure also. Okay, so that's the kind of the step forward after evaluation. To be very honest with you, that's a kind of a new thing in the DAC. Okay, the evaluation is there for quite a while. The approach to results is quite recent compared with evaluation. So some of the countries are still discussing internally what would be their results framework. But of course you need to go step by step. So you need to first to get the monitoring right, the evaluation right, and then you can get more on the results right. Okay? So a lot of things at the same time might be confusing. But when doing the monitoring, you can already think about this global dimension also and select some of the indicators that relate with these somehow. So it's not so complicated. Okay? But it has to be a pragmatic approach. For instance, the indicator on SDGs that we have there, that I showed before on Slovakia. That indicator on SDGs is a global indicator. Slovakia is just contributing to that. But it's contributing to that result. Okay, so we are playing with words, but it's also the different dimension of what we are trying to contribute and assessing. Okay? So, thank you, Sydney. So why is it important? Because it goes beyond evaluation to be more strategic about impact. Okay, collective impact. The global public goods that we talked yesterday. Okay? We are all contributing to survival, to better policies, to better lives, to preserve the planet. So what we are doing is part of that big picture. It's part of those results that collectively want to achieve. That's the big question. So it links with accountability again, communication again, learning again, and decision-making process again. So it's the same kind of dimension than evaluations, if you see. But it's a step forward. Okay? So it's an upgrade, if you want. We have these upgrades that sometimes we put in the software. So if we have the software, I would say the hardware is the monitoring. The software, it's the evaluation. The upgrade of the software is the results framework. Okay? Would that be something that is okay? Please raise your hand if you understand what I'm saying. Yes, good. Thanks. So, purpose definitions and key concepts. Just on the cycle, yes, we can go directly to the cycle, I think. It's better. So, if you see here the cycle of a results-based management approach, you are formulating your objectives. Yeah? See it as a project or as a policy, because this is working for projects or policies. When you have a vision, you put the objectives there, no? Then you need to identify indicators that tell you if you are able to implement those objectives. And this is done both at the project level and the policy level. Then you set targets. If you see the framework of the SDGs, it's all about targets first, no? So these are the targets, these are indicators that will lead us to the targets. And the targets is not the same than objectives, because I aim to, but I need to have a quantitative target. So for instance, what Slovakia was doing, I aim to have a strategy, okay, on humanitarian aid. What is my target? I want to have this strategy in 2019, with the envelope of 3 million, engaging with 5 line ministries. That's a concrete target that I have. And the objective might be much broader. My objective is to do this, but I have to have a target. And how I'm going to measure that target? No? Indicator 1, how many ministries were involved? Indicator 2, is the strategy delivered? Question mark. So do I have one strategy? Did I end up with 2 strategies? Because the negotiation process didn't allow me to have a comprehensive one, and I had to go for sectoral strategies? And then you learn from this process. See? Might seem too complex and bureaucratic, but it's helping you thinking through what you want to achieve and have steps. Because if you think about this as a tool to help you on the negotiation, for instance, you know where we want to go. If you don't go on that direction and your target or your objectives or your indicators are not there, you have the flexibility to learn from that. So it doesn't mean failure. It means adjustment. But it sets you a way where you can then adjust and discuss, because you need to go from these phases in terms of the cycle. So then you do the monitoring of those results, okay? But the monitoring is just the first step. And then you review, you report, and you start talking about what are the results, what is the impact. And then you integrate evaluation on that, because the evaluation is part of the learning process of the results process, okay? And then you use that comprehensive, integrated information for what? For going back to formulating or reformulating your objectives. So it's a cycle. Okay? And evaluation is part of this cycle, of this strategic cycle. So this is a kind of a cycle that should serve for something. So we are not just doing this monitoring and evaluation and results for the sake of doing it because OECD says, we should do it. We are doing it because these allow us to get the information that we need, the thinking that we need, to then improve the way we set our objectives strategically. Okay? So it's a cycle. It should be reinforcing for the next cycle. If we do and select, and I was saying this before, 2 evaluations per year, there are serious processes of assessing what we are doing, why we are doing it. And we already integrate these with this idea of the results framework, how we link these with the international agenda, how we link these with the vision of Bulgaria. Then these will provoke some thinking and changing in the way you are defining the next cycle of objectives. Because that's the normal thing to do. And you don't need to change your strategic vision to do it. We are talking about implementation here. Right? So you don't need to go to the law and change your vision there. But what you need is when you implement, you need to think about what you are really doing. So this helps you on that process. Okay? Concrete example there that will be good if you this is the most important slide for the afternoon, so pay attention, okay? This is an important slide. Well, why? Because we call the result chain, you know. I think this was a competition between the economic department in the OECD and the development department, because only the economists talk about value chain, so we decided to talk about value chain in development, no? So if there is anyone from the Minister of Finance of Economic in the room, I think you can take that home. Now we are competing with you guys in terms of using the same terminology. So what is this result chain? The result chain, we are giving you the inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impacts, and then we give you concrete example based on a project related with health, okay? So, what is an input? The financial, the human resources that I need to implement the project. That's an input, okay? What is the output? What are the products resulting, you know, that are relevant to the outcomes I want to achieve? So what are the outcomes? It's the midterm kind of results that we want to achieve. And then what are the impact that I produced? If we go to the specific example in health, we have the financial inputs, which was the technical assistance that we were doing in the project. What is the output that I immediately managed to have in the project? Imagine that is a training, so the number of health staff that was trained. In this case, you know, training of nurses. This is a concrete output, an immediate, if you want, result, very quantified, very specific. What is the outcome? The outcome is the thing that I'm contributing to. So the big result in the country, because this is a health project, it's the percentage of people, for instance, that were assigned, or, you know, the number of consultations that we increased in terms of the health coverage of the country. And then, what is the impact? We reduced what? What is there? What is there? Were we the only ones contributing to that in that country? Impossible. Are we the only ones contributing to that globally? Impossible. Are we aligning with the others contributing to this? Yes. So when we report on these results, we are also showing to the international community that we are aligning with the big goals. That's why the pragmatic approach that most of the countries are using is the SDGs. Because
in this regard,
health. Okay? So if you use the health, then you're already contributing to the result. Okay, so the result should not be seen as the output. The result should be seen as what are you contributing to, beyond the concrete, specific activity that you are doing. So you monitor your activity. You evaluate the impact of your activity and the impact of your policies. Then you tell to the world what I'm doing in terms of impact and results that contributes to the big global agenda. Yeah? Okay, so moving forward. That's a little bit the result of what I just was telling. The inputs, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impact. You know, from the local level to the international level, if you want. From the national approach to the international approach. We can move. So here it's an example of Finland's approach to this. And what did they learn by using these results framework? So by using this results framework, they were able to communicate to the public about the foreign policy of Finland in terms of development cooperation. So when they communicate to the public, because they have the data and they have this results framework, they are saying, we contributed to get out of poverty X million of people. We contributed to provide healthcare to X million of people. We are contributing to this agenda internationally. We are champions. So most of the countries that are champions on gender equality Are they doing everything that exists in the world on gender equality? No. But they are communicating well about how much they are contributing to that gender equality. Yes?
Two very short comments. Thank you. When you previously spoke about this result chain, I can just remind our colleagues that the Ministry of Finance in Bulgaria, it is the leader of an exercise, regular annual exercise in the Bulgarian ministries, line ministries. The exercise is called result-oriented budgeting. So, okay, result chain, but we have all these categories which you mentioned, inputs, outputs, and impacts. But especially on Finland's results report, I am really very happy to see this particular line. Over 56 million women used contraception through EU support in 2014-16. So this is a brilliant example of how Finland is reporting to the public that the same goes with Bulgaria. We're contributing heavily to EU external financial instruments, and this is the Finnish give us a brilliant example how to report to the Bulgarian public, Finnish public, in order to change that negative attitude, which yesterday Christo spoke about, that, okay, we are contributing to the EU external instruments, and they're doing fantastic jobs, and here the Finnish guys are reporting truthfully to the public opinion in Finland. Thank you.
Yes, and the result is giving you more the contribution dimension of what you are doing than the attribution dimension. What I mean by that is when you do the monitoring and evaluation, you are focusing on your own project and what are you doing. So it's the attribution, okay? That's what you are assessing. It's your individual thing. With the results framework, you are more on the contribution part. So in terms of communication, it's a completely different setting of communication here, okay? And then you can link more what would be, you know, the things that the public in Bulgaria would be liking to contribute to, international speaking, that they resonate with. And then how we put these figures together with these results approach that you put through the system. Okay? And how that helps you define the objectives and the outcomes you want to achieve or contribute to. See? So it's a way that also the donors were trying to find in terms of better communicating the results of what we are doing, because there was a lot of criticism about public money being used with no rationale on impact and results. So it's also pushed for this. And to be very honest, the UK was a driver on this because they had this initial strategy on value for money and how much that fostered then to the results discussion. Okay? We should be aligning ourselves for a result, a global result. So how much are we going to do through the EU? So if we contribute to the EU, we are contributing to these development results. Okay? How much do we communicate this in a clear way? But then, if we are giving to the EU, it's about our multilateral contribution. How much of what we are doing bilateral is also contributing to this? Okay? So that's the discussion that is part of the process. Sorry, thank you. So here it's a small exercise. I think you can all read it, no? So I'm just gonna ask questions here. When I talk about, let me see, population with access to the illicit tree, percentage, is this an output or an outcome? Think about, are you able to be the only ones contributing to this, or you are partnering or being part of a broader strategy contributing to this? That's what this differentiates an output from an outcome. It's an outcome, okay? Because you are contributing to this, okay? But if I say, Number of household with bucket toilet. Output. Because that's I can measure in my project, and this is part of my project. See what I'm saying? Okay? Then we can use them, of course, differently, because we can also have the percentage of children that we were, but generally, when we are talking about project, we say the number of children that were beneficiating from this project. Okay? So the number of children or the number of students that receive scholarships from Bulgaria. But if we say the percentage of students that were receiving access to third-year education, then it's an outcome, because we are contributing to it. Is that clear? Yes? Yes? Are you sure? Okay. So we can move. I think we don't have time. Then this links with something that we're also going to hear today, which is something that the EU likes a lot. So those of you that are putting forward proposals for EU financing know everything about this logical framework. We were traumatized by the EU with this for ages, no? This logical framework that suddenly, you know, I don't know if it happens to you, but when I was doing this, when I was a director in a civil society organization, when we were rushing for the publications, we tended to do this in the end instead of in the beginning. Okay? But this should be done in the beginning, because this helps you thinking about what do you want to achieve. But the logical framework is here. It's about, you know, the goal, the outcomes, the outputs, the activities. You remember this. Then the project summary, the indicators, the means of verification, and the risks. But why are we doing this? Because then we want to link this with the theory of change. And our colleague Vincent is going to talk a little bit about this theory of change discussion. We are not doing this only just to report and just to apply for financing. We are doing this because then we need to have a discussion about how much do we need to change also and contribute to the change collectively at the global level. So it's that one, okay. So I will now just try to finish here with the principles that we have in terms of managing for sustainable development results. So these are the 6 principles that we have in the OECD that link with this idea of the results framework. So what is the first principle? Support development goals and try to drive change through these results framework. Adapt to context, enhance country ownership. What does it mean? It's that our results should be aligned, or our framework should be aligned with the priorities of the country. So if the priority of the country is to have, 50% of children in schools in 5 years, we should use that as saying we contribute to that percentage. See what I'm saying? So these indicators need to be there in terms of outcomes and outputs. If we are just focusing on our small intervention, because it's always small, even if we are big, we always are just part of the big picture. If we are just there, we will say the number of kids that went to school, the number of schools, the number of teachers. If we start changing the way we think the project as the project contributing to something else, then we have an indicator about, the percentage of people that we are contributing to. See, so it's a mentality shift here. But this, we don't need to invent it, because most of the countries, most of the partners have these strategic programs and strategies of development that we can relate to. And also we have the SDGs. So you can have your own indicator, the partner, big picture, and then the big picture with the SDGs. And you already have 3 ways of measuring what you are doing. And 3 different ways of communicating. The monitoring, the daily basis communication in the team, with the management and so on. The evaluation about, the impact that I'm directly contributing to. And the third one, which is the contribution I do, which is a different communication. It's a communication for the parliament. It's a communication for the minister. It's the communication for the people. So you have different phases of communication here. And then the fourth one is about maximizing the use of results, information, and learning for decision making also. Okay? If your minister or your parliament sees that you are contributing to a big thing like reproductive health or, healthcare or education, it's much more important to him to understand that big picture than necessarily the small picture, because he's going to feel proud. And people will feel proud that we are trying, with our resources, we are so strategic that we are on the big picture. And then foster a culture of results and learning, and keep the results system manageable and reliable. What does it mean, this? This means that you should not invent too much bureaucracy around it, because otherwise you kill the process. The process should be strategic and easygoing, because otherwise it loses the capacity for you to learn anything from what you are doing or to communicate it about, if it's too complex. So even if this seems complex, sometimes, it's more easy to do than we imagine. And the jargon is a problem here. So we also, from the OECD, need to learn how to communicate better on this. And we're trying to reduce, publications from 500 pages to 2 pages, and it's quite difficult for us. But communication is a art, and this should be part of your thinking when you communicate to the big audience and when you communicate to the parliament. Some donors are using this for their annual reporting. So their annual reporting is not the 50 pages, the 100 pages describing all the activities. Their annual report is 5 pages saying, what is Finland contributing to globally? And then the parliamentarians focusing on the big dimension, not on the nitty-gritties. Okay? And then the political discussion is a different one. What is our value added as a country in the foreign system, in the global system? I will skip this. So, if you see here, you have 60 SDG outcome and performance targets with robust indicators already. So you have a lot to choose, to pick and choose, that relates with you. Okay? Again, aligning, using what is already out there. You don't need to reinvent a lot. Okay? I'm pretty sure that most of these will fit with what you are doing. And then I'm going to skip this one, but we will share the slide with you, okay? So this is the 12 steps in terms of results that you can take out for the linking the SDGs and aligning the SDGs with the results. And then in terms of conclusion, there is always scope to increase the alignment of the results framework and the SDGs, and use the country level at the same time, the country level information. But what you want to reduce in the end is the gap of information that might be out there for you. Okay? So if mapping the indicators that you have on the SDGs, the targets that you have on the SDGs, you can also map where you are missing information about what you are doing. So think about the cycle. In the beginning of the day, we start talking about reporting and data, getting the evidence right. So in the end, doing this exercise on evaluation and results is going to the fundamental question again. Do I have all the information that I need? Or am I missing some information when I'm implementing the project? Because I forgot to put an indicator there that would give me this information so I can say how much we are contributing to the EU, how much are we contributing to the world. So if you do the exercise backwards, you will go to the fundamental basis, which is again, data. And then if you don't are having a whole of government approach to this and coordinator, the communication with the public will never get it right because you are missing data, you are missing information. So it's important to link all the things. This is part of a cycle. It's not that you are great on results and you are better in evaluation. It doesn't work like that. It's not that you are bad on data and good on results. That doesn't work like that. The system is a system. So be pragmatic, simplify the things, don't complex them. Use what is already there. Be strategic about doing that. I'm very glad that when you presented, the vision for evaluation, you also thought about this question about the visibility, the communication about what we do, and I think that should not be forgotten in terms of the process. And at the same time, you need to have dedicated human resources that can really engage in this evaluation, and the independence of evaluation is important because you then get the questions that you need that will put you think about, okay, what is the data that I'm missing? So I can get that right next time. So I will close from that, I think, with a big thank you. Is anyone having questions on this? Are you convinced that you can do it? I'm just gaining time waiting for Vincent joining us. No, I'm entertaining. But are you honestly, I would like to have some, reaction from you on this. Do you think it's too complex? Do you think it's too jargon? Or you see yourselves already thinking about this results approach when you are thinking about your programs and your projects? What do you think? Are you already using it on different line ministries? Who would like to? You can speak in Bulgarian if you wish. I have my phones here.
I have one question.
Yes, good.
I think this is a generic one. Speaking about the sustainability of the official development assistance, how much the programming and planning has to do with the ups and downs in the bilateral relations between the donor and the recipient? Because here on the Balkans it happens. We have one day sunny weather, everything's fine. Next day we have some, friction, let's say. I don't want to mention any state, but we see that in some cases it is reflected in the level of the official development assistance. How is it, from your perspective, this fluctuation due to the ups and downs in the bilateral relations? Should the development assistance could be more neutral, more unbiased, more independent from the political fluctuations? Because it happens sometimes.
So there are different strategies to tackle that fluctuation, and there are countries that face a lot of fragilities in terms of their institutional frameworks, also in terms of their stability, political stability, and then there is always the foreign policy relations, and some of the relationships are also at a certain point, in silent mode because of other foreign policy issues, and it happens to every country. So the strategies that sometimes I put forward is part of the risk is de-risked when you invest more on the multilateral system, because you know that you can continue to have a relationship with some of the countries because you are investing in the multilateral agencies that are having the relationship with that country. So when we were talking about the priorities for the multilateral allocation of funds yesterday, and how they link with the bilateral priorities, some countries are very strategic about what are the multilaterals that are operating in our partner countries that are linked with our thematic priorities, where we should invest more than going on the bilateral relation. Of course, there is positives and negatives on that. One is that you need then to have a different strategy to be visible to the country. You need to let the country know that you are also contributing to the multilateral system in that country. and to gain, in the relationship by stressing that, because otherwise you disappear in the political partnership because the country is focusing on the bilateral. Another way is also to de-risk by using other partners. So there are sometimes the possibility for you to withdraw from the political dialogue, but still continue to have civil society, academia, foundations working on the ground that bring the brand of Bulgaria, but are not necessarily the government. To give you a concrete example, when there was I lost the count already, but one of the coup d'etat in Guinea-Bissau, after elections where there was a lot of investment from Portugal to bring the donor community to support Guinea-Bissau, and there was meetings in Brussels with all the donors that were engaging in the region, bringing everyone together, and everyone was contributing financially to the Guinea-Bissau, becoming more peaceful and all that. And after 3 months of all that diplomatic effort with the Guinea-Bissau government, there was a coup d'etat. And there was a difficult decision taken in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs about what we do now, because it's a question of credibility. We were pushing for democracy, we were pulling everyone together to support the country, and suddenly they decide again to do a coup d'etat. This is not serious. They need to become serious. And then we stop the relationship. But because we are aware of the difficulties of the people on the ground, we continue to give humanitarian aid and work with the EU, the delegation of the EU, during the period where we were not visible as a country in the diplomatic relations with Guinea-Bissau. But our civil society, the Portuguese civil society, together with the Guinea-Bissau civil society, continue to do these development projects on water, on food, and so on. So the long-term relationship with the people was not lost, even if we had a diplomatic difficult situation to manage. And, I think it was one of the few cases where we really interrupted the relationship. So it's about the strategy. So then you can continue to channel order. Okay? So you maintain a certain stability, but your channel of delivery is not the bilateral relationship country to country, it's the bilateral relationship country to people. Okay? And, of course, we can always use the EU delegations when they are there, because they also have the country's projects there and link supporting the people that they are already supporting, the risks, the political problems that you might have if you appear now alone.
And use the United Nations also.
Yes.
Impartial, unbiased.
Yeah. So that's also, finding solutions for when it happens. But that links with what we were discussing. You should already plan. So if you have a big bilateral project, you should already have... Exactly.
Risk management. Yes.
Risk management and risk mitigation. If you have already scenarios, okay, say, now there is a problem, we need to stop. No, let's not stop. Let's find other channels for delivering. So then you continue to deliver on the ODA funds. You would not be criticized by the Minister of Finance saying, hey guys, you have a lot of money there that you don't spend. Which also has a political thing, which is next year you don't get so much. Okay? We all know how the Minister of Finance functions. It's the same everywhere. You need to deliver. If you don't deliver, you don't get more money. Because they don't understand, which is normal for budget cycles, the fact that development takes time and you need to get a little bit more time to deliver sometimes, and there are, backs and goings and forwards and backs and forwards sometimes in the relationship. And that's why some of the countries are talking about 2 cycles here of delivery of budget instead of 1 cycle, because they need time to put things in place. But it's true. It's difficult for the budget, the annual cycle of the budget, to say you didn't spend. So you also need to think about strategies where you continue to have the stability in the spending of the ODA level, and even the push for increasing because you deliver. So that these, scenarios help you, these risk mitigation and management help you continue the budget spending. So then the ODA doesn't go like that. I hope I answer your question.
No, it's okay.
It's okay?
I think this is the role also of the non-governmental sector, the NGOs that should continue their work on the ground independently you keep on working, guys. If we stop, we continue.
Okay. Right. Well, good morning to you. My building blocks. And they've also talked about the infamous results chain, about results and result-based management, about impact. What I'm going to do is try to go back to a theoretical concept on the theory of change, and then immediately diving into some of the key additional concepts we need to grasp in order to have sufficient monitoring in place so we can evaluate and at some stage maybe start to talk about impact. The difficulty for me is that I come from the humanitarian world, and I'm trying also to adapt to the challenges of tomorrow, which are connecting with the development. But the first and foremost information I need to share with you is that we are not starting from the SDG. From a humanitarian perspective, starting from the SDG is not an approach that is going to be put in place systematically. We though have some UN agencies that have started. The World Food Programme has made the decision for the future to essentially base its entire strategy on 2 SDGs. Number 2 and number 17. Number 2, zero hunger. Number 17, partnerships. And all their country offices will have to present their log frame and their planning around those SDGs, meeting them. It's not going to be the case across the board for all agencies, though they will be probably retrofitting to see how objectives actually contribute to the achievements of SDGs. So, monitoring, we've been saying it's going from just looking at the needs to start to look at results, going from outputs to achievements, talking about evidence-based, demonstrating change, and if possible, impact. So the theory of change is, as mentioned there behind me, is a method that explains how an intervention is expected to lead to a specific development change, drawing on a causal analysis based on available evidence. So in the UNDAF context, the UNDAF, as you know, is changing name. I've briefed you ad nauseam yesterday about that. A thorough theory of change will help guide the development of sound and evidence-based program strategies with assumptions and risks clearly analyzed and spelled out. That says it all. It's very complicated. But what does it look like in practice? When we look at the issue of monitoring, we say that we need an evidence base to support making decisions. It's something also that we have started to hear this morning. It is about decision making. It's not only about accounting and balances or communication. It's actually about making the decision that we feel are right at the right moment. And we talk about adaptable and nimble processes that now need to be put in place. We have talked about increases to accountability and a sound planning. If we look at issues such as monitoring or indicators and so on and so forth, we need to remember that there is a planning that has to start at the beginning. Planning informs subsequent monitoring. Monitoring is not the starting point of planning, though at the end of the result chain, your monitoring helps you into your new phase of planning and programming. But monitoring is not the only base on which we should do planning. There are many other elements, and that's analysis that will give us a sound base to do this planning and this programming. We can have things based on common sense. If we feel that a project may have an added value and maybe is not exactly fitting the exact parameters, but it's common sense to have this implemented, we may consider it. Not everything needs to be tight. We can use common sense. We need also to look at issues around pertinence of an operation and non-priorities, and then link to a result chain. We're going to go back to that. Just two premises. Don't look at the text, just look at the bold. What is written in bold is response monitoring and needs monitoring. These are not the same things. If we look at humanitarian aid implementation, the response is about the identification of a shortcoming and about improving accountability. A needs monitoring follows change in context. And what we have, I think, lacked across the board was a more thorough analysis of problems. And we ended up with programming and planning that were very much in silos. So the idea here is to go from actually the demand to the action. Is there demand for sound monitoring? My answer is no. There is no yet demand for sound monitoring. There is demand for accountability and results and demonstrating that the funds have been well used, not for monitoring as such. So there must be a demand. It must be, and formulating a demand for monitoring is not an easy exercise. We also need to go from a concept of reaching to a concept of covering. In humanitarian aid, reaching is delivering, follow me slowly, delivering some form of assistance at some time to a targeted population. That means that I can say that in Afghanistan, I have reached 9.2 million people with food. Let's say, we measure, and we say 9.2 million. I take a number just there, okay? It's not a real number. What does it mean? That maybe sometime during the year, at some stage, there was a total count of 9.2 million people who had received food. Does it mean that they receive food for the next 6 months or 8 months? Does it mean that their needs in water were met? I've spent many years in the field. I have a white beard, almost white. I have never met someone who needed food only. People need food. They may need protection. They may need access to water. They may need access to employment. Nobody has one need. So when we are looking at measurements, what is happening is that we have not made enough efforts to actually try to know what we were reaching. I've been working with an interagency group for several weeks on issuing a new guidance on reached figures. That was easy. Well, not that much, but it was easy. Next year, I'm embarking on a project to measure coverage. Coverage is a whole lot more complicated. And that's going to keep us busy because we need to look at issues around humanitarian consequences, around living standards, around the general accountability to people and to the communities. I've heard that, for example, in some countries, you have people going around and meeting people, for example, in an IDP, internally displaced persons, IDP camp. You meet someone and you say, "Good morning. Have you received water this week?" And the person says, "Yes." "Was it enough water?" And the person says, "Yes." And you tick, "Yes." Then you go down and you see the person received 2 liters a day for 5 days. That is not meeting the standards. So measuring around the feeling of people is not enough. Maybe they had no water. 2 liters of water is really a lot better. But it doesn't mean the standard of X liters per day for a person. And then what was the target of, in this case, I look at the humanitarians. What did they set themselves as a goal? What did they say they would achieve? Would they deliver against the standard? Yes or no? They may have made the conscious decision not to deliver against the standard because of other issues linked to an ongoing conflict, linked to issues around access, linked to their own capacity to deliver. And that sometimes the equivalent of a food basket needs to be reduced. We need to understand the parameters upon which the plan was done and the programming was done before saying it didn't achieve. And that takes a time to actually understand what we were set to achieve. We have many indicators. We have heard some examples. I will show you, if I have the time, one or a couple more. I already realize I'm super late, I'm sorry. You're going to be nice to me.
I'm always nice to everyone.
Thank you. That's very sweet. The issue is that we have a plethora of indicators. If you look at agencies and partners, they measure 15, 20, 30 indicators in some cases. If you take a sector like education and you ask them, what is it that you are measuring? They will give you a long list. The objective now is actually to select in this list what is the most meaningful indicator that can contribute to either a specific objective or a strategic objective. If you remember yesterday, we talked about the overall SDGs, and when I talked about planning in development and humanitarian, we talked about setting coherent outcome-based strategic objectives. Not saying that we are going to be saving lives, protecting people and doing some resilience. Being more precise. Then we can have further objectives and you need indicators, but we don't need to have 30. We need to have less. For that, we have in humanitarian affairs an indicators registry that is going to go through a review. So we are going through now these modifications and these reforms, see if we can capture sets of standard indicators in this registry that will be easily applicable with slight modifications from context to context. What we need to remember is that we never should transpose and copy-paste an operation from one context to another. Contexts are different, countries are different. In terms of indicators, though, unless there is a modification on what the living standards are and what the baskets are, we can try to look at some basic applications of indicators with modifications. Where are we at? We have overall a very uneven approach to monitoring in the field. It's still perceived as a high energy, high capacity specialized task. Planning is still not gearing up for monitoring. It is not perceived as an opportunity to drive change. We are not looking enough at the risks. Though we ask risk information, do we have risk management? And I think that was also a point made by my colleagues of the OECD. There is a lot more pressure because of prioritization of funding, because of capacity, competition for funding. I'm not supposed to say that, but I'll say it. I'm on camera, but I'll say it. The competition is hard, very hard. It's the first to reach the donor and get it done. We are going to need to look at how this is done, because we have been instructed to do more efforts to engage not only with the international NGOs, but with the national and local ones, and of course with the communities. But we have a massive network of local partners who still do not have access to international funding, for many good and bad reasons. But we need to start to focus. We do not need to have the presence of every single international agency in country. I'm not inventing this. This comes from the Secretary General of the United Nations. The presence of the UN in countries is going to be drastically reviewed. It's not because an agency wants to be there that it will be there. It will be there if it's useful. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but change is coming. We have trust issues, aid diversion. I think it was mentioned this morning. In conflict areas, we have aid that disappears to a certain level of acceptability, as long as it's measured, reported on, and explained. We know that those things happen. We just need to be aware and measure. We have issues of cost, of value for money, satisfaction of community, pressure from parliament, sovereignty issues, and so on and so forth. So it is a complicated area where we want to start to do monitoring. We're going to have requirements. We're going to need leadership. Leadership to make demands about monitoring. We are going to need capacity. Measuring takes time, takes people to do it right. We'll talk about third-party monitoring a bit later. We're going to need guidance. We have some that needs to be reviewed. We're going to need tools. We have some. They need to be improved. We are going to continue to deal with issues of access and issues of data availability. And I concluded on the issue of data. That is very important. And I will talk about transparency and accountability around data. You will have the presentation, so I will skip this one, which basically explains to you how the Command Country Assessment, the CCA, looks at the theory of change vis-à-vis also results focus. So the question is, are the tools linking to the results change? You've looked already at the results change. We don't need to look at it again. You have strange logos all over the place. These are data websites that are available. Just by Googling them, you will find that there is a lot of information. The UN at the Secretariat level is trying to also to have working what is called now the UN Info, that is now internally accessible to some selected agencies. I don't have access to it. But I'm talking with the people who are dealing with UN Info. That will be part of the efforts of the UN to improve the coordination and transparency, as well as accountability, by giving results, frameworks, and how operations are progressing. But we didn't wait for UN Info as far as humanitarian are concerned. We have practices in place. Some UN agencies have monitoring and evaluation enshrined into the way they work. Some are double-hatted, humanitarian development. We have direct monitoring of partners, NGOs, for example. We have also the pool funds. Bulgaria has been contributing to one of the main ones, the Central Emergency Response Fund, which, as you know, is managed by OCHA in 2017 and 2018. And I hope Bulgaria will consider contributing again to this pool fund. And we also have in many countries, country-based pool funds managed by OCHA, which are looking at funding projects that are the closest to affected communities, focusing on engaging local partners who are responding, and with very strict monitoring frameworks in place on monitoring how the funds are spent, how the project unfolds, and how it's managed overall. Now, I'm not really making an advertisement here, though I am, but I'm saying that we have ways also to look at monitoring at the closest port of call, the closest to the affected communities. We have looked at tentatives around third-party monitoring. So hiring specialized companies that come in a country and do the third-party monitoring, so it provides additional neutrality. We've talked about the issue of bias, possible bias of a partner that is in the field and basically is deciding itself or through a group how it will monitor things. And then some could say, well, there is a bias because actually you're already implementing, you monitor yourself. We need an independent monitoring. We have tried that third-party monitoring in 1 or 2 emergencies already, and it has not produced much results. Why? Because we are bringing in people who are independent, who do not know the context, who do not end up having access, because 80% of the countries where we work are in conflict, and we end up with a 30-page document that doesn't say much. I do not have a lot of faith in third-party monitoring. I have more faith in helping the system to do it better. I do think that's what we need to do. And we also have the issue of payment by results. And we have already seen some counter effects of that. I've seen, for example, a donor in a particular country with a particular agency, cannot give all the names, basically saying, you said that you would deliver, I don't know, you would build 10,000 latrines, you build 9,000, you will not get paid. And I'm talking about a very large donor who is supposed to understand those things. And then somewhere in the chain, someone decided not to understand anymore. And it went wrong. So it took a lot of time to actually waste time to explain that, well, you may not be able to build 10,000 latrines because something has changed. We are in a conflict zone. And you may not have been only able to do 9. So please, can we acknowledge that work has been done? So we have pitfalls around payment by results. DFID is very also keen, for example, to look at payment by result. We have to build specific sets of indicators to meet requirements around payment by results. So there is a combination of initiatives that are going to influence the way things are planned. On transparency and accountability, you're going to manage. On transparency and accountability, we have, as humanitarian, you know that we have what is called a humanitarian program cycle. Perhaps one day the word cycle will disappear, where we focus on making data available. So on monitoring, I'm in charge actually of the financial tracking service of OCHA, which, as you may know, is monitoring the allocation of funds by donors to partners through a complex chain, because now we are in theory capable of tracking money from the point of origin through every single pass-through and up to the end to see how funds transit and who is paid by whom to do what, when. And we also have, because we do planning, we have all the logic frameworks and all the data and indicators that are decided by those interagency teams in the field. We have now basically made the choice to make them all public. So actually, decision makers can gain access at any stage to any operation and see not only what they said they would do, but what they are actually doing, if they have updated their data. And as it is public, if you don't update, you will have questions. So we also use that as an incentive for partners to actually pay attention to the fact that the eyes of the world are now on them. I've briefly talked about UN Info. You may have heard about the AC, also the Interagency Standing Committee, the Commission and others have set up also Inform, which is a platform that measures the risks in crisis and disasters in 191 countries. So the benefit of all of that is building a collective case, reinforcing confidence into what people are doing and partners are doing, supporting a dialogue on priorities so we can see which one we agree on, accountability, advocacy, supporting decisions, looking at contributing to agency-specific planning. In the new development framework, the onus is not on the agencies to share their country plan. The onus will be on the agencies to design their country plan so they contribute to the greater objective. A focus on resource mobilization, transparency, and so on and so forth. If you don't mind, if I manage to get this on. Yes. So I was talking to you about the way nowadays we can gain access to actually real-time data. So last year, my team and I have launched this thing called Humanitarian Insight. What it does is that for every single country where there is a humanitarian response plan in place, we actually have an active tracking of the premises of the plan, so we understand what they've decided that they would do. And each time a registered and authorized user is changing anything in the database, whether they are in the field or HQ, we actually have their progress here, and we just count the beans. So we know actually where they are at in terms of funding, how many projects are in the country, who is doing the projects, are they reaching their targets? We have a lot of pending. When I'm coming back from Sofia, I'm going to be focusing on filling that, because my Secretary General told me in a meeting, I want this, so I need to deliver it. But it means that, for example, for a country like Afghanistan, you can know at any stage what they set themselves out to do, what is their target, how many people are supposed to receive aid, what's their level of funding, and that's real time. If I change a financial flow somewhere, within less than 30 minutes, I would say 15, between replications, it's updated, and it counts the beans. So you know where we are. So you have access to the key documents, so you can understand the framework. You also have a look at disaggregated data. If I look at Afghanistan and the province of Helmand, you can easily see the people who are in need with disaggregation, the targeted people, and the actual reach people in target. You see that the dots are changing size. They may increase, decrease, or disappear. But that's based on their latest periodic monitoring review. We do not impose when countries need to do it. We say they need to do it. Monthly, quarterly, biannually, it depends on their capacity and their need, but something needs to happen. So by the end of the year, we have an idea of whether or not they've met their targets. The same applies to financial tracking, the other tool that we have, where we try to understand where the money comes from, where the money goes, and the progress on appeals. So you see a northy thing going southy thing with a progress on appeals. And for each country, you can know in real time actually which donor is given how much to how many projects. You can have their projects, you can read the projects, and you can understand where they are at. Reporting to the financial tracking service is the responsibility of donors and partners. It's voluntary, but we increasingly have understandings with donors that they will impose contractually to their partners to start to report financially using the financial tracking service, so everyone knows what has happened to the funding. So there is an encouragement that it becomes a bit less voluntary. And I mean, Sweden, for example, this year discussed with us and said they would now impose contractually that it's done. I have also had discussions with DFID about this. I see Anna looking, so that's the signal. Yes, please.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you. This is very, very useful for us clarification. Clarification. We recently had examples for example, making contributions, for example, Afghanistan to the International Organization of Migration, but because we lacked your advice to implant, to include in this contractual obligation for our aim to report to FTS. But next time we should do that, yeah? Like this.
It is your choice. Because I cannot
We
implement.
are very receptive to your advice. Thank you.
No, it's because it has been set up as a voluntary system for 27 years. But I think that the donors and the taxpayers want to know more. There was, just before the summer, a conference on gender-based violence in Oslo. We are going, not only on the gender marker, we are going to need to show delivery around gender-based violence issues. Disability is coming this year and for the future as a very important topic. This is going to need to be taken into account. So we have a pile of additional indicators, and we will be asked to report on them. And I think that financially, it's the equivalent. We are going to need to show that actually there is programming around empowerment of women. There is programming to address gender-based violence. And there is no better way than through the planning and to the financing to actually to show that we are trying to deliver.
And very practical question, because
Yes.
you mentioned just gender-based violence. Another contribution we recently made was to the UNFPA
Yes.
for gender-balanced program in Syria. So we again missed this contractual obligation, but I guess in a separate letters of donors, could you ask this to respectful of the IOM and UNFPA to report to FTS?
So, I mean, we always encourage that. Now, there is something I need to tell you. And for that, I would be very happy actually to follow up if you want. We have some processes in place with most of the UN agencies. UNHCR, UNICEF, WFP report centrally, because what we want to avoid is to have double systems on accounting for financing. Whether, because we would have a system in the field where people count and say, did you hear? Bulgaria gave 1 million. Oh. Then they send a message, Bulgaria, 1 million. And at the same time, UNICEF HQ says in New York, wait a second here. We didn't see a contract. It's actually not 1 million, it's 350,000. And then we have an issue of double reporting. I should have put the example the other way, because you would have been more generous. Sorry. But we have central system with a number of UN agencies. It's not the same with the NGOs, for example. We do not have such agreements with the Red Cross. The Red Cross is completely independent. They choose. We will never get any data from the ICRC. Let's be clear. They have a specific mandate. They protect the convention. I cannot barge into their office and ask. I have no right to barge in anyone's office. I'm wait, and we do our best. But for NGOs, yes, we have encouraged donors now to seriously encourage them to make the effort to provide quality reporting. Because donors also use this as a peer review. I hope it was useful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we have just received humanitarian assistance in a form of a good lunch prepared for us in the restaurant. So please, I would like to invite you, and then we will continue to what time, let's say, 2 o'clock or 1:30? I think 1:30 is fine.
As you wish.
1:30 is good for you. 1:30, добре ли е? Да започнем, ще приключим малко по-рано. Седно е петък, но не. Както и да е.
Oops.
Result-based management, yes?
Yes.
Колеги, продължаваме с лекцията на Сидни Люклерк върху конкретния опит на Швейцария за Result-based management approach.
Yeah, before we go into more of an exercise, and we'll explain everything to you. We just wanted maybe just to show an example of kind of a results structure of a country, and we thought it was interesting to take the case of Switzerland because it's trying to have a new set of indicators for their development cooperation. So, but also what's interesting is having to see all the way through from the corporate level results to country level to project level. How do they work to have a kind of a concrete idea? So how does the Switzerland development cooperation works in terms of aid delivery? Well, first they have this 4-year dispatch, this 4-year strategy in a way. And right now it's 2017 to 2020. It's called the Joint Dispatch. And it's aligned with the SDG with an overall goal that is of a world without poverty, in peace, and for sustainable development. So that's kind of the overall objective of their strategy. That's then they have 7 key strategic objectives. So I won't go into them, but yeah, just for example, the first one is contribute to the development of international framework for responding to global challenges, prevent and manage the consequences of crisis and disaster and of fragility, promote conflict transformation, support sustainable access to resources and services for all, etc., etc. So there's 7 key strategic objectives. And who then put these objectives and this strategy into place? Where there are 3 main actors, and they share 5 kind of policy instruments. Oh, perfect. Then it was printed. So, so you have the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation that does alone humanitarian aid and technical cooperation and financial aid for development countries. You have the State Secretary for Economic Affairs, so they share with SDC, the Swiss Agency for Development, transition aid and cooperation with Eastern Europe. And they do by themselves economic and trade policy measures for development cooperation. And finally, you have this human security division that deals with the measures for the promotion of peace and human security. So it's kind of an interesting framework. And then, well, how do they measure their aid, and how what is their results framework? And I think that's quite interesting because they have this comprehensive suite of reporting projects first that feed into their annual report that is done jointly by SDC and SECO. I'm focusing more on the SDC part here, and that then translate also in the triennial report against the dispatch period. So that's kind of the overall framework. But in 2016, they introduced kind of a novelty. They developed a series of 40 indicators at a corporate level, and they're called the Aggregate Reference Indicators. And why did they do that? Well, first because there was an increased demand for accountability from Parliament and the public, but also because they wanted to address the proliferation of indicators across the different priority themes in different contexts, which was largely resulting to some kind of inability among the Swiss corporation to paint kind of a coherent picture of their contribution. As an example, there was an internal study that they did, which revealed that they had just for the food security and nutrition sector, 140 indicators. And so it was difficult to have a clear picture. And so how did they build the indicators? And that's also what's interesting. Well, first they are linked with the Swiss Development Cooperation goals, and the goals have been measured against the 7 objectives, and they kind of mix in between like easily aggregated rich indicators, I would call. some indicators that measure the delivery of policy or legislative or legislation via the technical assistance, and there are outcome indicators such as income change or time saved by women in terms of activities. And what I think is very interesting, and also for our discussion this afternoon, well, is that they mapped each indicator to one of the objectives of the dispatch, of their 4-year strategy. They also mapped it against the thematic area they're working on and to the relevant SDGs. So if I take, let's take this indicator, a YY number of births attended by skilled health personnel. The way it's written in their documents is, okay, basic services. Basic services, well, that's their third objective of the joint dispatch, which is support sustainable access to resources and services for all. Health system is the SDC thematic area, and the number of births, that's going towards the SDG 3 on ensuring healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. So they kind of, for each indicator, they kind of put it against their different framework at different level. I think that's quite an interesting model. A second example is, for example, the XY international norms, global policies, and political process developed in the field of food security and nutrition. So how does that relate to their joint dispatch? Well, first, because it's part of the global challenges, which is the first objective of the strategic objective of their joint dispatch. It relates to their thematic area of food security and nutrition policies, and it relates to SDG 2 on zero hunger and SDG 3 on ensuring healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. So it's quite interesting that each indicator takes a different anchoring, I would say, in the strategy at the national level and also at the international level with the SDGs. And so on top of this, aggregate reference indicators, standard indicators, they also developed some conflict and human rights indicators that are mandatory in countries that are considered fragile states. There are also a set of non-mandatory thematic indicators with an outcome focus at country and project levels. And project implementers may use, well, when it's relevant, some bespoke or tailored indicators to reflect the project and country contexts. So at country level then, if we look at how they work, they have more than 40 country or regional level cooperation strategies. And so what do? They have, well, these strategies have a 4-year time frame, so that's quite important. And that does not include only the Swiss aid flow, but also it incorporates development cooperation, trade, foreign policy, and humanitarian interests. So that's also kind of an interesting way to build the strategy. And so the strategies, well, they build on 3 key things. Well, the partner countries' objectives, the joint dispatch, so the strategic objective, the multi-annual strategic objective of the agency, and on international agreements. And so within each strategy, well, we have different results framework for each sector that they work in. And they prioritize that on the basis of the country itself. And so each results framework specifies indicators at 3 levels: country level results, results of the agency's interventions, and operational and organizational performance indicators. And finally, how do they work at the country and project level in terms of approach, in terms of management? Well, so the staff representing SDC, the agency at country level, report back against the strategy every year. These reports are internal, but they include some steering implication for the coming year. So that's kind of the feedback loop. And so what do they do? Well, they analyze all 3 levels of data. They do what they call a contextualized result statement, and they kind of rate the different aspects. And also what's interesting is that their result framework is not fixed for the 4-year strategy. It allows for some flexibility if they see that it should be adapted at a certain point. I'll skip on the learning culture, and of course, and that's kind of also that's based on the country case study that the OECD did. And since there is kind of an increased focus on indicatorization, if we can call that, and there is another case that you will see in the PowerPoint presentation, but we won't present it now. That was more focused on the qualitative rather than indicator part of the results framework. Here, there's the challenge of kind of creating the link between the different levels and aspects of the aggregated reference indicators. So basically, how do we manage to have those to embed these indicators at all levels? So that's one of the main challenges that they are facing now, because they're integrated those indicators in all the strategies now. And of course, in terms of implementation also, because when you are transforming the system, you may create resistances in terms of appropriating the indicators, and that may you have to provide the staff with the necessary resource to actually translate that, and also engage with the partners to ensure that they are on board with these new indicators. I think I'll close that for the example, so now we can go into more practical fun, I hope, and I'll leave the floor to
Mr. Valerie?
Mr.?
Sorry.
I'll leave the floor to you to introduce maybe the exercise.
Thank you. И така, колеги, ще ви представя една идея, която се роди вчера, дано да я приемете, много интересна. Ще направим едно упражнение, което ще бъде базирано на представянето на, т.е. опита от наша страна да приложим този подход, за който стана въпрос, основано на резултати управление. Подхода на основано на резултати управление, като ще разделим аудиторията на 3 групи. Всяка една група ще вземе по един проект за помощ за развитие. Един ще има хуманитарен характер, един ще бъде многостранен. Групата в средата ще работи по многостранния проект, един хуманитарен проект и един двустранен по помощ за развитие. Огнян не би ли ни казал кой ще поеме другите два? Коя част от аудиторията? Абсолютно произволно разделение.
Тези първите 2 колони вземат двустранен проект и ваш лидер на упражнението ще бъде колегата Павлин Тодоров.
Да, който е член на комисията за оценка и има директно...
Тези 2 колони са многостранен проект и последните 2 колони хуманитарен проект, който с лидер на групата, съветник Валентин Гайдаров и доктор Янева, които са специалисти по хуманитарна помощ.
А лидер на многостранния проект се самопровъзгласявам аз със средната група. И сега нека тарторите, така да се изразим, да си отидат при групите, за да обясниме какво е точно на колегите, за какъв точно проект става въпрос и как трябва да се изготви списък, едно много кратко списъче с цели на проекта. След това имаме айде сега превеждайте. Input. Ресурси. Ресурсите, които трябва да бъдат използвани в проекта. След това имаме резултат в смисъл на конкретни индикатори на резултата. След това имаме цялостен резултат като outcome. И този списък с тези индикатори, след края на упражнението, всяка група ще го представи, за да видим доколко е научила сутринта това, което беше преподавано. Добре, разделяме се за кратко.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Director. I think what is important is that you should not forget that for each objective, you need to come up at least with one indicator, one output, and one outcome. Okay? So there is a line of reflection. You can have several indicators to some objective, but you cannot have objectives without indicators, outcomes, and outputs. Is that okay? So you can then discuss among yourselves what you want to present, and we will be here to facilitate the discussion afterwards, as with our colleague Vincent that will join us on that facilitation. We will give you half an hour to 35 minutes for you to discuss. Try to be efficient and try to identify. We also distributed the list of the SDGs to the facilitators, and we are going now to give them the indicators that are already under the SDGs. So try also to relate to the SDG framework when you have that discussion. Okay? If you have any doubts, we will go around and try to explain to you better.